Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see you again, and welcome to IG Special Forum with breakfast. It's a great privilege to welcome Professor Ann Krueger, one of the most distinguished economists in the field of international trade and development. Over the last several decades, more than decades, as a scholar, senior vice president at the World Bank, chief economist there, and as the first deputy managing director of IMF. You also served as acting managing director of IMF. Professor Krueger has helped shape global thinking on trade liberalization, economic reform, and the role of markets in development. Today, we meet at a moment when the international economic system is undergoing profound change. Trade tensions are rising, tariffs are returning as a policy instrument, and as you know, geopolitical rivalries and even military confrontations are rising, increasing, and these factors are increasingly shaping economic decision around the world. These developments raise fundamental questions about the future of globalization, the resilience of global trading system, and the strategic choices facing countries like Korea. With her deep experience and long-term perspective, Professor Krueger is uniquely positioned to help us understand where the global economy may be heading. Without further ado, let's welcome Professor Krueger for opening speech, lecture, for about 20 minutes. She would like to minimize her presentation so that we could have more interactive Q&A sessions, more lively sessions with you, with our audience. And after a speech, we will follow up with the Q&A sessions. Let's welcome Professor Krueger.
Thank you very much. Is that good? Microphone okay? Okay, good. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to come back to Korea. And much as what you said about I might help with some of the understanding here, I think it goes the other way around. I always learn when I come here, and I think understand things a little better because of it. So thank you very much for that nice introduction, and of course for the invitation to see all of you. I appreciate it. And we'll look forward to your comments. I think there's no doubt that perhaps the degree of challenge was understated in almost everything that happens right now, because the United States, and I'm quite proud of it, since World War II, basically undertook to establish a rule of law in the world and to work out a way in which we could have pretty soon I'll be eating it. Threat. Establish the rule of law and an international trading system in which the most important principle, which you've probably heard, was the most favored nation principle, which was in the WTO, or earlier the GATT Charter, and which basically said that any privilege that you give to any one other country will be given to you too. Now, if everybody has that same MFN, most favored nation clause, that means that a big power cannot discriminate and bully countries one by one. And unfortunately, that is precisely what President Trump has done in going on bilateral negotiations by country and forgetting the MFN principle, which was basic to the GATT and then now to the WTO. It is essential, it is crucial, and most of us, including me, took it for granted because it seemed so obvious that you shouldn't discriminate between countries until such a time, of course, as then we found out that perhaps it was more important, which has happened now. And yes, that puts the trading system under threat. It means that it's very difficult for anybody sensibly to negotiate, because even if you negotiate, say Korea negotiates with the United States and gets a tariff, you do not know if the next day they'll give somebody else an even lower tariff. The result of which is the bargaining breaks down, tariffs go up, and the world becomes less and less efficient, less and less productive, and it's bad for everybody, especially bad, by the way, for those who are doing it, in this case the United States, which I think is paying the biggest price for it, but we'll come back to that. So once that was done, of course, the other parts of the WTO agreement were not paid much attention to either. There are clauses that say that trading companies doing business in our nation will be given national treatment in the courts. The courts cannot discriminate in favor of nationals either. And that's important too. And I do know of cases where indeed trade is broken down precisely because the judges favored their own national and they were taken to court. And I think we've lost that form of discrimination as well. And on it goes. The WTO also had, and it's still there in the books, a good dispute settlement mechanism. Some trade lawyers referred to that dispute settlement mechanism as the crown jewel of the WTO, because instead of getting into trade wars, countries could bring their complaints when another country violated the rules to the court, and the judges would decide and recommend a remedy so that it was no longer the case. All of those principles are thrown into doubt, and the first thing I want to say is I still believe that those principles are important, they are sound, and they make for a better world. I hope the question seems to be, in every country doing whatever they do, the question should be, will there be ways in which this brings us back to those rules, or will it take us further away? And if it will take us further away, it's probably a bad idea, because we want to get back to the open multilateral trading system. It's in everybody's interest, and particularly of countries that are open traders and who have benefited from it, such as Korea. So I hope that that will be something watching for and what you can do it. Now, President Trump was doing great damage, and it was enough to keep trade economists and trade lawyers busy. But then along came, of course, some of his other actions, including, in particularly, the China-U.S. trade war. China was anyway a rising power economically. And the trouble with that was that when the U.S. and China ran into tensions, when the two biggest members of your group get at each other, it makes it very hard for the group to work. And that's one of the things that's happened, and that is an issue on the table, although I think that was beginning to be a little bit resolved, or be starting to be, because the Americans discovered that they needed things from China, I think to President Trump's surprise. And on the other hand, the Chinese discovered that their economy was so interdependent that they would have trouble too. And it began to sound as if things were warming up a bit, with indeed a visit by President Trump to China scheduled for next month, which has now been canceled because of other things that have happened now. So that for the moment, that's not what it was. But my guess is that will come back, I hope, in the very near future. And it will be one step forward toward getting the system back in order. But that's perhaps optimistic, I don't know. Now, we have other things going on, too. Russia invaded Ukraine, and that's clearly critical from a national security viewpoint for the Europeans, and in my view, for North Americans and East Asians as well. I think if Ukraine is successful in this, Russia is successful in this in Ukraine, we will see them taking a next step somewhere before too long, and it seems to me that this is something that is against anything in terms of the international order and the way things should go. But it raises national security questions, and I'll come back to that in a minute because that's troublesome. There is also now, of course, the U.S.-Iran situation. And we've been promised all kinds of things. We've been told what the objectives were, but there have been different objectives, many of which either were already told had been met earlier or which haven't been met. And we're still, I think everyone is confused as to what really the objective is or why. I'm pretty sure that includes the White House, because I think they themselves did not thoroughly discuss it before they went ahead, and I think they've been surprised by Iranian resistance. I think they did think that the Russians thought they could get into Kyiv in 3 or 4 days. I think the U.S. thought it could persuade the Iranians to bargain in 3 and 4 days. Both countries were wrong. And I think we have that on the table, and that's important, not only for the obvious reason that we don't like it, and obviously because wars are always bad, and therefore we should resolve it in everybody's interest. But in addition, what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz is very likely now, even if it stops quickly, to lead to a very major shock to the world economy in terms of energy. Everybody thinks, well, oil is used in gasoline and cars and other things, but it's also used in some other stuff. And right now we have about 15% already of this year's supply of oil blocked in the Gulf of Hormuz. And even if things start unraveling, it will take months to get that sorted out. Those ships can't transport anything else until the oil is offloaded. So they're tied up, so we don't have the transport facilities to take them anywhere anyway. Obviously, LNG, natural gas, is also very much involved in this, and is very important for many countries, including Korea. And that also is important in the making of fertilizer. And one of the issues that's going to happen very quickly, we're now in late March. If by May there is not a way to release much of that into get the fertilizer production going, it will severely impact agricultural production in many countries, both rich and poor, in the coming year. This is not simply an energy crisis because we won't have enough to drive our cars, but that's true. But some of these other things, tractors won't run in farms, and things like that are going to be very important and complicate the issue. But I'm running on quickly. There's too much. Any one of these we could spend hours on, and we won't. On the economic side, things are complicated for a number of reasons, a major one of which is the U.S. is, after all, the world's largest economy. And already the Fed is having trouble bringing inflation under control. Meantime, the fiscal deficit that was anticipated and approved by Congress for this coming year, starting October 1st, was going to be a fiscal deficit in excess of 6% of GDP, which is way too large for any economy near full employment. And as of yesterday, I think, maybe the day before, I've been gone for Washington too long and things change, but 3 days. But in any event, with all of that, there is a problem because the Pentagon is now asking already for more money. $200 billion is the first request, but it's clear another one is coming for another $300 billion. That will enlarge the deficit and, of course, be more expansionary pressure, more likely to bring inflation up. But at the same time, the tariff structure that has resulted from Trump tariffs has meant that there are bottlenecks in production everywhere, which is likely to make production fall, which could go into recession. So nobody is, and the markets clearly are not sure in the U.S. whether there's going to be inflation or whether there's going to be recession. And there might be some of both, which, of course, is almost the worst possible combination. But as of last night, the analysts were saying that they did not think that we'd see any further interest rate cut in the U.S. this year because of what they see as the additional pressure brought on by Iran. So let me just stop for a minute here and point out that quite aside from what Trump has done to the international order, which is disastrous, what has happened in the United States itself has been almost equally bad. What he's done to the tariffs will hurt the U.S., and I think the U.S. will hurt more than many other countries. The U.S. will less likely be hurt by oil directly because we're an exporter. But some of the other things he has done domestically are going to have negative consequences. The antagonism towards science, which is shown both in the anti-vaccine and other things, and pulling out of the World Health Organization, which is, again, terribly bad for all of us. Everybody, even in rich countries, needs to have information about what's happening in the rest of the world by way of new pandemics, new things that are going on, new diseases that are discovered. And the international community was doing pretty well in keeping that communication going. That's, to some extent, already greatly damaged. But there are other things. Major law firms have been attacked and, to my regret, have backed down because of it. Major universities have lost much of their funding, Harvard being almost the biggest loser, but Princeton has been in there, Stanford has been there, many others. Harvard was hit with a $6 billion cut immediately in its budget, when in fact Harvard, of course, has contracts for scientists going out 2 or 3 years, and of course that's a huge cut in the university budget. Others the same thing, and university presidents are a little bit intimidated, and instead of getting together as they should, each one of them is trying to please Trump, just as countries are doing it one by one, which they should not either. They should be getting together and ganging up to offset his divide and conquer strategy with something better. So now we're basically through what I would call the first round of chaos. But the chaos is continuing. It is not over. And I think that uncertainty is perhaps the biggest economic cost of all from all this. People do not know which tariffs will go into effect when. People cannot find out what what prices they pay, even on things they're already importing. The uncertainty as to whether anybody should invest in import competing industries is strong because maybe the tariff will go down. The uncertainty in export industries is even greater because the U.S. dollar is appreciating. And why is it appreciating? Because Trump, who wants to get rid of U.S. trade deficits, at the same time wants other countries to invest in the U.S. Well, more investment in the U.S. means a dollar appreciation. And that means less of what he wants. And so when he says he wants more manufacturing jobs have fallen. When he said he wanted to cut inflation, it has gone up. When he says he wants more manufacturing output, it has gone down. Trump objectives, as he states them, and what he does, do not fit. They are not consistent. And that makes it very difficult to understand what will happen next or why. And I think that's the problem for the entire world. And so I will quickly stop for questions with just two comments. The first is that there are flaws in the WTO and they need correction. But the way to correct them is not to do it right now. The way to do it is to do just what the Asian countries mostly did. When Trump turned the TPP down, what did they do? They took it and they signed it without the United States, right? Why don't the other countries in the world, all the other trading nations, do exactly the same thing now? Immediately adopt the WTO charter unchanged, except minus one party. Call it something, WTO minus one is my name, but find a better name. And committed trader or something like that. But in any event, get going together, and the United States would have very little bargaining power facing everybody. As it is, it has a lot because it's a big trading country. But if Korea and Japan and the European Union and the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and so on get together in all this, the situation could change. And one of my pitches everywhere I go is that this is important. Prime Minister Carney of Canada has already proposed something like this. And I think putting it all together and doing a WTO minus one would be the way to carry out for many countries. And I urge Korea to think about it because I think Korean support for it would make a big difference now because Canada is a little bit isolated and everybody's saying, yes, it's wonderful, but it wouldn't work. And I think it's wonderful, but it would work. And I think it would work so well that the United States might very quickly come back to the bargaining table, a much humbled, but much better, more constructive member of the international community. The WTO does need change. One of the things that needs, surprisingly enough, and this is legal, we have lawyers here who can tell me I'm wrong, but in the WTO charter, one of the agreement, one of the stipulations is that there should be no protection imposed by a country, except it's okay if it's on national defense grounds, national security. There is no definition of national security. Dressers that you use in bedrooms to hold clothes are deemed national security by Trump so he can put a tariff on them. Everything is national security. Why? You need those things. You need watches for national security. You need everything under the sun. We need a legal definition of national security and probably an international agency like the Atomic Energy Agency that decides what is and what is not militarily important. I agree we have to have something, but right now, national security is what we need, and what we have is tariffs on everything. So with that, let me just say that I think the success of the open multilateral trading system was so great that most countries will try not to abandon it if they can avoid it. And if we get a WTO minus one, we'll be able to have it mostly going, and it will anyway put pressure on. But even if not, I think the countries that stay as open as they can will be the countries that do best in this new world if we are doomed to stay in it, at least for a while. And I think some of the countries that lead the way out will be the ones that do the best and will be able then to persuade other countries to do the same thing. So short term, I'm pretty pessimistic. Longer term, I think the markets normally prevail over governments, and I think this is another case where that will probably happen again because open trade, an open multilateral system is a market system, not a command system, and that's what works better in the world. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. As I said earlier, I would like to open the floor for very active interaction between our Dr. Krueger and audience we have. So you could raise any questions. Actually, Dr. Krueger covered a wide range of issues, not just related to international trade, but also more fundamental issues underlying this recent global economic trends, development. And you could also raise questions regarding Korea's position in this radically changing international environment. Toward the end of her intervention, Dr. Krueger said something about Korea's role in revitalizing multilateralism as a leader of a kind of middle power countries around the world. So you're welcome to raise any questions. Who would like to start? Okay, Dr. Ho, from IMF, or your friend.
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation, and particularly I think we all have noticed about this great uncertainty that every night and every morning we wake up to see what President Trump had said last night, and he's so whimsical. The question I have is that at the end of the presentation, you said you are short-term pessimistic and long-term optimistic so that the market can prevail. We all noticed that how impressive the Michael Carnage speech at the Davos. They were very much impressed. But when you said domestically in the U.S., you said that all this attack on universities, attack on judicial system, attack on a lot of things, still his divide and conquer strategy seems to work pretty well up to now. Then when you look at all those things that happen in the U.S., how can it be more optimistic about Carnage idea? And you just mentioned that about middle power grouping together to come up with a effective counterbalance when you are observing, even though in the U.S., you are not doing that. You are failing to counterbalance what Mr. Trump has been doing. So when you look at all those things, and when you look at all these different countries' interests together with the threat of the President Trump, can you be really optimistic about this middle power grouping together to come up with any counterbalance? That's my question. Not to be hopeful, but to be realistic. That's my question.
I think yes, I can still be optimistic. I mean, first off, even the things that are happening in the United States, there is some backlash. Excuse me. And with that, I think some of these things will go. But the U.S. is also learning. Remember that Trump was very hostile toward China, and then he discovered he needed the critical raw materials. And all of a sudden, he changed a bit. Because I don't think he really has a good underlying analytical framework or anything like that, but on the other hand, he knows enough to know that if there's something that's quite central to industries such as the ones that critical minerals are for, and if China has a virtual monopoly of them, that he can't be too nasty to China without too much pressure from too many parts of the United States. And I think the more the rest of the world gets together, the more the businesses in the United States will agree among themselves to form a more united front, because some of the CEOs of American business industry have caved very quickly, whereas others have tried to fight. And I think if they all got together, they'd be far more effective, just as I think if the rest of the world gets together, it will be far more effective. The United States, I think our exports as a percent of world exports are maybe 12%. We're not that big. But when we look compared to one country at a time, we look very big. And that's why I keep looking at this WTO -1 as I think perhaps the quickest way to get back to something sensible. I was in Australia, and I think about 1973 or 4, at which time Australia and New Zealand, after World War II, had emerged as much richer, higher per capita income, of course, than Europe and so on, because they had been spared by some of the war things. But as Australians and New Zealanders went to Europe for vacation and so on, they began noticing that the European airports were looking shinier and nicer and all less crowded and all that. And the Australian airports were looking exactly the opposite. New Zealand was the first one to reform. But within 3 or 4 years, New Zealand had no success, that the Australian Labour Party, which was the most protectionist, reversed course and changed it. And Australia had the longest record after that until I think just last year, of an unbroken growth every year after that because of success. In Latin America, Chile was one of the worst countries in terms of 2,000% per year inflation and things like that, until one day came in the government, which decided to do more sensible economic policy. Other countries in Latin America, politics changed. They changed toward more sensible economics because everybody saw what was happening in the country that did things right. And I think Korea even has set such an example in many other countries, for many other countries, in terms of trade policy and things, where it was the Korean reliance on the open market that made a difference here. And as that gets understood in other countries and they see what is happening where they are not doing the same kinds of things, I think the degree of protection in the other countries, while still in many cases much stronger, higher than it should be, is much lower than it would have been had there not been the Korean Taiwanese example. So I do think that what our neighbors do does influence us, and I think that if neighbors get together and they can be influential together even more so, I think there's reason for optimism over the long run, because those that do the right things will grow and those who do not will not. The U.S. may not be a superpower unless it forgets some of this nonsense. We're not going to grow very much if we're putting on tariffs and all that kind of stuff. We're getting big companies are busy with the CEOs coming to Washington to talk to the president rather than going out and saying, how do we restructure our business or how do we get our efficiency? You would see it's coming. It's not something that will come. It is there now, and it's already very bad. Intel gave 10% of its stock to the U.S. government. We're getting government ownership and all that, and the CEO of Intel was there begging for it. We don't want that, and that's not the kind of market that will work. And the countries that do that will not be as big as they were anymore. I remind American audiences of something that I think is very important and Americans have forgotten. In 1850, Mexico and Argentina both had higher per capita incomes than the United States.
All right. Dr. Shin, no question? Right?
I answered all of them.
Sure. Okay, please. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Professor Kim.
Thanks for the positive optimism. Yeah. I just heard yesterday, I don't know how much of us or you know that there is a WTO meeting this week.
Yes, there is.
Right? So
yes.
Korean representative is flying right now probably to Cameroon. Mm-hmm. But most of my friends, economists, even trade economists, have not heard about the Cameroon meeting. So we should a long way to realize the optimism. So, but yeah, thanks for that. And then I agree with you that that's what we as economists should do. So three quick questions. I was an advisee of Christopher Sims at Yale, whom you hired in Minnesota, I believe.
And who unfortunately passed away last week.
So in due respect to him, let me ask title three questions is, Minnesota, Stanford, and Johns Hopkins, right? So others may interpret as before World Bank, between World Bank and IMF, and then the third one is IMF. When you were at Minnesota, so you may wrote many key papers, but rent-seeking is the term you coined, I believe, right?
Was what?
Rent-seeking.
So one of the
Yeah. So after observing for 5 decades of the literature, what is the good definition? You said we need definition of national security. So you are the one who should provide a definition of good rents and bad rents, right? So you meant like bad rents, but there are good rents as well. Yeah, you have rents, and we have our expertise in some field. So from an economist perspective, what is a definition of bad rent we should avoid? Because we are all looking for good rents. Yeah, we think my rent is good. Yeah, the same for you. So what do you think is the critical difference between good rent and bad rents? And about the second question about Stanford. So I was looking at your CV, and for Korea, 30-year anniversary of the exchange rate crisis coming up in 2 years or a year.
Wow.
And you are neither at the bank nor the fund, but you are at Stanford. So as an observer, what's the most memorable observation you had at Stanford? And then other question is, most serious one is, at that time, U.S. had the productivity growth.
Go
The
ahead.
productivity growth
Oh, yeah.
in the 90s, right? Alan Greenspan was a minority, but he's probably right. Now the candidate for the Fed chair is arguing for a similar thing for the current AI revolution. He may be right, he may be wrong. We don't know the answer. So if you can give advice to him or to the Fed staff, what was the critical one for Greenspan to look through the data and understand the productivity, growth? Because that matters for Koreans, because if Fed changes interest rates, that matters a lot for most of the people here, especially for some people, for sure, I know. The last one, which I called Hopkins, for the current issue, I was told actually an hour ago in the subway, by coincidence, that you visit the current Bank of Korea governor yesterday, right? That's not a secret, I believe, yeah. But for the incoming governor, is nominated, not confirmed yet, Governor Professor Shin. What's your advice in this juncture of uncertainty, not only trade but also everywhere else? What would you say? He's in Basel right now, so
Okay,
but if somebody can relate,
Thank you very much for your extensive questions. By the way, he's Professor Kim Jin-il at Korea University. Now, I haven't heard anything like this. Very extensive, and also with respect to your 4 stages of your career development. You followed the question from each area. So appreciate that question very much. Okay. As succinctly as possible.
There's a joke, actually, about, I think it came from England, the joke about the young man who went in to take his oral final exam, and the question was, define the universe and give 3 examples. Well, this is almost in that class. Anyway, let me try quickly. The rent that is not desirable in the longer run is the rent that is there with a non-expandable resource. So if there's something, so if the government says we can enforce, we will only allow 1,000 automobiles to be imported a year. The price of those automobiles is going to be something for the people who get the licenses to import. That part that they get above what they would have gotten if you could freely import is a bad rent, because it's taking resources away from where it should be, and is not inducing good resources to do more for some other reasons, except, of course, to smuggle and what have you. So it takes things where they shouldn't. I could go on for that, but it's not a matter of legal or illegal. It's a matter of whether it is something where it induces gives incentives to people to do the right things, or it gives incentives not to. And a lot of the rent seeking is not to. There are some borderline cases, and it can get more tricky than that. But on the other hand, that's basically, it's not legal, illegal. There can be legal things. The National Science Foundation in the U.S. asks for people to come in and give their permission for grants. They let everybody submit without really qualifications, the result of which is a very large number of people spend lots of time preparing their applications, and lots of people in Washington go where there was really no chance. And that was wasted activity. Putting in some threshold there, you must have a PhD or you must have had 2 years of scientific work or whatever. It would have cut down that without any change in the outcome. And so that, in that sense, it's a fixed thing, even though it's done in the other form. So you really look at it and see what's going on there. By the way, one of the things that is happening in the U.S., of course, is that with Trump getting into so many things, we are seeing more activity of that sort as people are working more and trying to find more ways to get the rents that are coming from what he is doing. So that's, I think, becoming more of a problem in the U.S. What do we learn from the Korean crisis in the 1990s? Well, the first thing, of course, was simply the bank Korean Bank of Korea had gotten a little bit tripped up in freeing up the interest rates in the wrong order. And in so doing, money was flowing in where it shouldn't have, and things like that. And it was a little too eager liberalization on the part of it, and not the whole thing. And that's something that people need to look at when they're doing it. We free up something. What does that do to the things that are not yet free? And that happened in the Korean case, and as far as I know, was one of the big things in all of that. There were other things, of course, and Korea was a little bit caught by contagion. But I think the main thing was simply the going into the OECD and opening up some parts of the capital market before others and not getting that sorted out as it should. And again, I'm going fast. AI is I could speak longer than I'd like to on that one because I'm no expert. But I have been watching a bit when on YouTube come lectures and things around the U.S. at least, where people whom I respect and who know more about AI than I do and are good economists are talking about it. And I think that if I were to judge on the basis of what I've seen, which basically is probably not more than 10 or so people, but 10 is quite a big number, they are nervous, as am I, that AI will not deliver as much as the optimists think or as quickly. They think that there will be benefits, there's no doubt, but those benefits will take a little longer to materialize. It will not be that everybody gets laid off next year. It will be much more gradual. People have gone back to look even at electricity, which was a big one. And again, it's a much more gradual adaptation and not as quickly with the big ones, partly because people have things they're not going to abandon, partly because it takes time, et cetera, et cetera. So I think on AI, we're going to see something. The other thing to be said, though, is that the other part of it is that insofar as AI has an effect so far, only 2% of U.S. employment has been affected in manufacturing by AI so far. And all of it seems to be almost entry-level stuff of things that people learn when they first go into a business or something, and not much later. And what they're guessing is that what's going to happen is that after 3 or 4 years, maybe this underemployment of new college graduates, let's say, will have left where there's a pipeline of good engineers. And we'll see the market return more to more normal. But in the short run, the impact is likely to be on the least skilled of those who would have gone up the line in the skill track. The companies may not need so many people doing some of those things, and that may make a difference. But that's all guesswork, and nobody knows. I've heard perfectly good people say they think it's going to be very quick, and I've heard people say it's nothing at all, and everything in between, because when you don't know, the truth is you can only make an informed guess, and my guess is that the informed guess is it will move, and it will make a difference, but not quickly, and not so much as it will be as disruptive as has been measured. And you may even notice that the high-tech companies in the U.S., at least, that have been involved in AI the most are the ones that have been having the trouble in the markets lately, and that seems to validate some of what I was hearing. But the last question was one about uncertainty and the new governor. Well, first off, he is an excellent economist, and he's done very good work in a number of jobs already. And if he were to tell me it was one way and I thought the other, I'd believe him and not me. So I don't want to say very much about him because I really can't say. Uncertainty is a problem going to plague everybody. It's bigger than it was. That's going to make a difference. My guess is in general it will end up cutting down investment to some extent. There's some other things I could go into just in the details. But in general, it's going to be a watch and see and interpret it as it goes. And I can't think of anything better, anybody to succeed the current governor who's as well qualified as Shin is to do it. So I think it's a good appointment.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Dr. Shin and Mr. An. Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
I love your energy and stamina. Thank you so much for your great contribution. You've been a defender of an open trade system for such a long time, and that we're entering a lasting phase of a global trade fragmentation, unfortunately. And that said, what policy can prevent the collapse of a multilateral trade system? That's the first question. And what should institutions like the IMF or World Bank do differently today compared to the past crisis to prevent systematic contagion?
Okay, the second question was IMF World Bank and what to do
to prevent systematic contagion. First question is what policy can prevent the collapse of a multilateral trade system?
What is it about the
multilateral trade system?
I heard that part, but I don't hear
It was, yeah.
What policy?
What policies? Yeah.
who. Who? Well, I mean, as I said, I think for individual countries.
The WTO -1
Yeah.
middle power.
Yeah, I think that's certainly, that's what I'm urging, of course, but on top of that, it seems to be important not to do things that are going to be difficult to untangle. A lot of countries, when they face a crisis, will build a new factory, which is not a good idea for government to do anyway, but be that as it may, once you put those, if you subsidize even to have the factory built, once the crisis is over and you want to dismantle it, there are workers there and there are things that's very hard to undo. And monetary policy in that sense is better than fiscal policy. If there is fiscal policy, it needs to go in areas where there is a need for infrastructure and things, and not into things that will interfere with private economic activity in places where it could be productive again. Monetary policy also gives more space for private economic activity. If the government increases infrastructure expenditures too much, there's no room left over. So all of those things go in that same direction, that moving toward more flexible economy is always desirable. And as I said, getting together with other and forming an international organization consisting of those open multilateral trading nations who want to continue the process is part, it seems to me, a very big part of what a good answer could be. It's not necessarily what they'll do, but that's what they should do.
Okay, thank you. Mr. An, you
thank you very much for sharing your insight over the all the international situation. You started to explain about WTO rules that the United States created basically. But it seems that all of these things is happening because of relative decline of the United States. Some people in the United States believe that the current rules in the WTO might not be enough to have fair competition in this world. So the United States is basically this MAGA group is trying to break this, at least disregard these rules and rely on unilateralism, right? So as you said, by doing this, the United States is hurting itself, I think. And in the end, as you said, U.S. is going to be more inefficient and less economic. And in that sense, Trump is, what he's trying to do is not the MAGA, but the opposite for the moment. My question to you is, because all these things are coming out of the sentiment of the U.S. people that the current system is not helping the United States. It could be short-term phenomenon, but it could be very longer-term phenomenon. So my basic question to you is, what will happen in the post-Trump period? Do you think this MAGA sentiment will prevail like this? Or in 3 years' time, the U.S. will be completely different and come back to multilateralism or the international rule that the United States has been, working so long a time, to have this globalism? That's my question. And one comment that I'd like to give you is that is about Korea. You talked about WTO minus one. Cooperation, among others, alienating the United States. For Korea, it is a little bit difficult because we are dependent 100% on in our security the U.S. support, and the market share that our export market share of the United States is huge, and in this country it seems that the Korean people are. They have more confidence in the U.S. market sometimes rather than Korean market. Korean people are heavily investing in U.S. market. So with all these things, security and economic stake that we have, it is very difficult for Korean government to go along with WTO minus United States. For the government officials, it will be extremely difficult. That's my comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Comment and
Okay.
question.
Well, to your last point, I didn't say the WTO minus one should be without the United States as a pointed objective. I said the other countries, remember the United States was when they started TPP, and then Trump withdrew. Then the 11 countries that were left did it by themselves. The U.S. was not offended then because it was not, and I think the same thing would happen here, that you just would do WTO -1, and we go with that. The U.S. is free to join. Nobody's going to stop it. I think even with when you came up with the comprehensive partnership in place of the TPP, you left it open at any time for the U.S. to join. And the same thing would happen here. I'm not saying be against the U.S. I'm saying unite the others. And I think you can do both. I think, I don't have to be your enemy to say I'm going to form a club, and if you don't want to join, that's your business. We'd like to have you, but if you don't come, we'll do it anyway. That's perfectly okay. So in a sense, that's what I'm advocating. I'm not saying do something against the U.S. So much as in fact, I actually think I agree with you. The U.S., if it keeps up these policies, will certainly be, in some degree, more of relative decline than it would otherwise be. And that said, I don't want that for my country, and I don't want that for the world, because I think our leadership, as bad as it was better than what would happen elsewhere. I don't think that I trust the Chinese to do a better job than the U.S. did. I'm not saying do, but did. And I don't think the Europeans are up to it right now, and I'm sure the Russians don't even want it right now. So I think that it's, in a sense, the U.S. has been the only game in town that brought about the open multilateral trading system, and I wanted to get us back there. And so my question is, how do we do that, as I think is yours as well. So with all that, I don't agree that there's been that much decline yet. In fact, interestingly enough, over the past, since COVID, the U.S. has grown more rapidly than Europe, more rapidly than Latin America. A few countries in Asia have done better, but not very many. And even China's relative advance has slowed down a great deal. So I think so far there is time for all of these things to sort out. And I'd end this comment just by saying that Winston Churchill is quoted as saying, some people say he didn't say it, but I like the quote anyway, so I'll use it, whether he said it or not. He said, you can always trust the American people to do everything wrong. But once they've tried everything they can that's wrong, you know they will do the right thing. It's all that's left. And in a sense, I almost think that's maybe the resolution here. I'd like to speed it up, but I think that may be it.
So my question about Trump, what happened after Trump administration? Do you think next U.S. government will return to multilateralism?
Well, I don't think anybody knows. I think there are two parts to the answer to that. One is that, of course, Trump has some followers who are politically interested in following him, and who would be doing many of the things that he did much the same. On the other hand, there are some in the Democratic Party, unfortunately, who agree with him on some of these things too as well. So there's a lot of political confusion. I don't think we need to wait till 2028 in some regards. I think if the Iranian thing drags on, as it looks to me like it will, and if indeed that's not resolved fairly quickly, it would not surprise me to see both houses of Congress change to Democrats. And that, I think, would not turn things back, but it would stop them from getting worse. That would then give a 2-year period in which perhaps people could argue sensibly about what came next in the 2028 election. So that would be, in a way, my best local forecast. But remember, Trump has reversed on critical minerals. He has reversed on other things when political pressure is enough. And he's even doing it as we speak on some of the stuff on the budget for the ICE and the immigration things. It's happening today. So he certainly is not a strategist. He does not think through things and anticipate it maybe as well you would like. But on the other hand, when things go badly, and if he sees it hurting him politically, he will change course. That might, I don't say that's the same as going back to open multilateralism, but at least can contain him to some extent.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Mr. Lee?
He's right behind you.
Yeah.
Oh.
Thank you for sharing, Professor Krueger. In a more unpredictable global environment, how should open economies like South Korea position themselves to sustain growth? Particularly, Korea has a strong industrial capacity, but still valuated at a discount in the market. So what would be the crucial point for South Korea to have a sustained re-rating in growth and in the market? Thank you.
Well, the first part of the answer is if something really bad happens to you, you may not be able to make it so you're better off, All you're trying to do is make it less bad. And it may be that if we have the energy crisis, for example, there is absolutely no question that Korea is dependent enough on imports of oil and natural gas and some other things that there will be something of a hit. And the easiest way to absorb it is through the exchange rate and monetary policy. So I would argue that flexible exchange rates, monetary policy is a part of the answer. There are other things that any economy can do, including making it more flexible, which helps no matter what. And as I understand Korea, and I don't know enough, and I haven't looked at it closely, but especially in the labor market, there are a number of things that might be done that would make it more flexible, would make it easier for people to change jobs, carrying their pensions with them, for example. Making pensions portable is one of the things that's been seen to help everywhere it's tried. Some other things like that. Every country has different labor laws and all that, so I don't want to talk about the specifics. But if I were president of Korea for a day, God help us all, but if I were, I would ask somebody who knew about it to take a look carefully and see what could be done to increase flexibility and look at things where there could be trade-offs so that it would please both business and labor, and find political packages that brought some of that flexibility together, and maybe even look at some of the, Scandinavia has a wonderful record in this regard. Look at what's happened in Scandinavia, see how they've done this, because they had very rigid labor laws. And they've gotten rid of that, and they've done much better ever since. And look at the experience of some other countries. I'd ask people to come up with a package that looked good for Korea.
Okay. Yes, please.
네, 그 100년 전에 제가 한글로 말씀드리겠습니다. 100년 전에 영국은 그
I can't hear. I can't.
Okay, just
Oh, thank you.
아, 예.
I could
please.
before she did that. I don't know what you did, but it was fine. And now something's gone wrong.
네,
Oops.
말씀드려도
I could
될까요?
hear her, and then you changed it again. It's not on now. It was. It was fine, but you've done something to take it off. No, it was fine.
아직 말씀 안 드려서 그렇습니다. 지금 될까요?
Sorry. Thank you. Yes.
예, 말씀드리겠습니다. 100년 전에 영국은 그 힘이 점점 빠지다가
좀 크게 말씀해 주시죠.
아, 네.
네.
Wait a second. Now, what's going on? 100 years ago.
예. 제가 궁금한 거는 일단 10년 뒤에 그 달러의 가치에 대해서
Now I'm hearing two things at once. So go ahead.
Okay.
예.
You.
예. 저기 일단 10년 뒤에 달러의 가치에 대해서 묻고 싶은데요.
Okay. He's asking for dollars value.
In 10 years, I got that one. Yeah. Okay.
말씀드려도 될까요? 그러니까 100년 전에 영국이
Yeah.
힘이 점점 빠지다가
I heard it.
예,
I
독일하고
heard you. Yeah.
전쟁을 하다가 실은 달러 패권을 그 파운드에서 달러로 빼앗긴 경우가 있는데,
Dollar dominance.
예, 근데 이제 지금 실제로 미국이 점점 이 힘이 빠지는 가운데 기존의 WTO 무역 질서가 미국에 유리하지 않다고 지금 생각을 하고 있는 게 트럼프가 압도적으로 지난번에 당선이 된, 그러니까 이상한 사람인지는 알지만 이 사람이 지금 이런 게 필요하다라고 미국 사람들이 선택을 한 것 같고, 미국의 입장에서 이렇게 힘이 점점 빠져서 그 이 질서가 중국이나 다른 데 더 유리하다면은 아직 힘이 있을 때 그 제도를 다 바꿔서 지금 세계 무역 질서를 개편해서 바꿔서라도 다시 한번 도약을 해보자라는 생각인 것 같은데, 한 10년 정도 뒤에 그렇다면 지금 이걸 잘 극복해서 달러가 다시 그 미국이 다시 어떤 위상을 회복하면서 달러의 가치는 계속 유지가 될까요? 아니면은 지금보다 훨씬 약화되면서 우리의 해외 투자나 해외 뭐 금융자산들이 대부분 달러인데 이거를 다변화해야 되는 이런 상황으로 진행이 될지 이게 궁금합니다.
Got the message? No. Whether we should.
I got it. No. No, the
dollar or
interpreter
diversify.
did very well. It was the trouble
Okay.
hearing a very nice soft voice. Okay. First off, you started by saying the U.S. is declining. Not true. If you take percentage of world GDP, in the past 5 years, the U.S. has grown. It has grown, and the U.S. is still the largest economy in the world in trading. If you talk in terms of current exchange rates, which is what you want for trade, the U.S. is still the largest. There's no question about it. Now, the United States after World War II was far larger than it is now, but that's in part because the United States wanted the rest of the world to recover. The United States undertook the Marshall Plan, which was tremendously large at the time, which enabled Europe to get back on its feet and start growing. So some of what you're calling decline is actually returning to something more of a balanced world structure, which is exactly what most of us wanted to see the United States do, because it has been an internationalist country, and we wanted to see the rest of the world prosper. U.S. foreign aid, for example, Korea, was intended to help the Korean economy grow. It has not been that the U.S. is trying to stay 50% of the world economy. We've tried to help others grow and be prosperous as well, and thought that was in our self-interest. And many of us still think so. The United States is not 100% behind the current set of policies. Most opinion polls, the latest opinion poll I saw of Americans about trade, a reliable one, I think it was Wall Street Journal and Washington Post, okay? Last week, 70% of Americans disapproved of Trump tariff policies. 70%. That's a very big number in politics. Anything over 55 is big, because obviously the politicians are trying to find something in the middle. There are some who are highly protectionist. There are probably 25 or 20% of the American people who will vote for Trump no matter what, but there are 25 or 30% who will vote against him no matter what, too. And it's the ones in the middle that are going to influence the way things go, and that depends in lots of issues, and you can't for sure foresee what they are. There obviously in each party there are extremes, and many of us want to see something in the middle. I hope we see it before too long. We'll see what happens there. As to what will happen in the dollar in 10 years' time, the forecasts of the decline of the dollar have been happening since 1945 or before, and in part that's because, again, the dollar was the strongest currency, and even stronger than was in the interest of the U.S. or the rest of the world. We wanted recovery of Europe, and as they recovered, of course, they gained market share and so on. That was to be expected. But the interesting thing is, once the euro was formed, which was about 2000, and it was known even before that it would be, everybody said, okay, the dollar dominance will decline. It did not. Right now, with the war with Iran, with the things going on in the rest of the world, you would think the dollar was declining. The minute they bombed Iran, the dollar strengthened. The dollar is still what people trust by way of an international currency. It may not always stay that way, and I think last I saw, the value of international transactions in dollars was about 80% of the total. In 1970, it was probably 90%. So yes, it has gone down. I don't think that means that the thing that keeps it that way is there is no currency that can replace it. The euro cannot do so for a variety of reasons, including that it does not have an integrated financial market, and the capital flows are not there to support it. The Japanese certainly can't do it. The Chinese have capital controls, and they can't do it as long as they have capital controls. There is nobody left that you could go to. It's going to be the United States for the time being. Unfortunately, some of the things, unfortunately for the rest of the world, in this regard, the United States has had a track record that people trust. Someone else has to earn that trust, and maybe the U.S. will get it back. We still have as much as anybody, and not without reason. So I think that, yes, things can happen. Ken Rogoff has a book, Our Dollar, Your Problem, in which he says that if the dollar keeps this up, there are a number of reasons why sometime in the next 20 or 25 years some things might happen. I agree. The United States does not have a law always to be the number one currency. That doesn't mean, however, that it can't stay there. It just means that it won't stay there unless it itself does good economic policy.
Okay.
You've got one
All right.
way around.
Thank you. Yes, please. Yeah. So, it's okay to more questions.
Thank you, Madam, for your
You're the boss.
very interesting presentation. And my question concerns this idea of growing at the expense of somebody else.
At the expense of what?
Growing at the expense of somebody else, you know. And my country, Colombia,
Oh.
Colombia is growing and it's developing. And the development of Colombia and the growth, economic growth of Colombia is, to our perception, to the perception of Colombians, is no threat to anyone. This idea, of course, you have just explained 1945 and the idea of the United States of using cooperation to help the world growth. Now, my question to you is this notion of growing at the expense of somebody else something that we as a country can be blamed for? I mean, like, is it really objectively something that has a notion in economic data or economic analysis? I don't think that's the case, but it seems to be that not only for Colombia but Latin America and Africa, it looks like a case of not cooperating with certain regions of the world. Thank you.
I guess I just disagree with you. I think in general that as countries grow, they tend to export more of what they're good at. That helps the countries that are importing those things because they get them cheaper, but meanwhile those countries do other things too. I don't think anybody would argue that, for example, Germany's growth since 1947 or 48 has helped the rest of Europe and has helped the rest of the world. I think in general, in a year, if you tell me that real world GDP will grow at 4% next year, that will help almost every country in the world. If you tell me that it will grow, but we also have an oil price increase of major proportions, that may hurt some countries, there's no doubt about it. But on the other hand, growing, that's not growth. That's just simply a change of the oil supply. In terms of growth, as we mostly know it, for the most part, most countries, growth floats all ships. And countries that have good economic policy, it floats them more, so they grow more rapidly. But that's not at the expense of others. In fact, normally, more growth means you import more. There was one 19th century economist who was very good on this and understood a lot about it, maybe ahead of his time. And his comment was, if you really think that exports are so bad and that it hurts the world, that imports are so bad it hurts the world, okay, then what you should do is take all the ships in the world, load them up with all the goods you can put on them, send all those ships out to sea, and sink the ships. Then you'd have no imports, and everybody be happier? We know that's not true. But if you think about that for a minute, it's when you say growth hurts others, that's what you're saying. You're saying that basically that is going to hurt the other because the other is something. But I think the more growth elsewhere, if I'm a businessman in a small town and the town grows rapidly for some reason, I'm going to be better off as I sell things in that town. And the same is true of the world. Okay. I don't think it's that different.
Okay, given the time constraint, we would like to invite the last question.
Thank you for highlighting the importance of WTO proceedings. As you know, we have the MPAA agreement that replicates WTO proceedings among signatory states just without the US. And so far, almost all OECD member states have signed up to the MPAA, except, of course, for the US and unfortunately also except for South Korea. Do you think the MPAA could be the basis for WTO -1? Is this the nucleus for the idea you have just raised?
I would hope that the thing what I'm advocating is along those lines. But the reason I'm saying WTO -1 is if the nations that are all open multilateral trading nonetheless sit down together to decide what they would like, it will take forever. Because everybody would like it, but everybody will have an exception here or there, which is why I'm suggesting let's go, just as the CPTPP took the TPP rules. They just took them, and some of the U.S. had insisted on some things. They took those out, but they said if the U.S. wants to come in, we'll put them back. They did not negotiate for changes among themselves. They just basically took those, and it's a splendid example of how if you want to do it fast, You can't go into a negotiation and change everything, because then you'll want brown shoes, he'll want black shoes, somebody else will want blue shoes. And by the time they get it done, they'll be agreed on 43 of one, 22 of the other, and something else, but it will take them 5 years to get there. So the argument is to go and just take what we have in the WTO. It's not perfect. We need lots of things. We need a national security definition. We need to get rid of the unanimity principle. We need lots of other things. And that should be done, but that should be separate from just simply getting something to restore things for the moment. So I'm advocating a two-step process. One, get the system going with all of those who want to keep it going and are willing to sign. Then let others come in and do what you want to with all of these other kinds of issues as they come up, and as you could negotiate them through the WTO -1. And if some of the ones that didn't want to come in on the terms in that agreement, let them come in. The agreement should have a explicit form that anyone who signs on to this charter, we will welcome. But they have to sign on to that charter. They can't just come in and say, we're going to sign on, and then we're going to pay no attention, we'll put our tariffs up and down. I don't mean that at all.
Okay. Said, I think this time is up for you. So I'd like to thank you one more time for your brilliant speech and stimulating conversation with us today. I hope we all pray that you have a safe journey home.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing you very soon.
I hope so too.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chen, and thank you very much, Jan, for your brilliant speech and insightful conversation. Thank you.